Dear Rector, distinguished colleagues, esteemed guests, dear students, it's my honor to introduce Professor Nicholas Stern and his outstanding accomplishments in the field of welfare economics. In 2006, Lord Stern published a Stern Review on the Economics of Climate Change, and the report estimated that if we don't act, the cost and risk of climate change will be equivalent to losing 5 to 20% of GDP each year, now and forever. By contrast, the cost of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the worst impacts of climate change can be limited to around 1% of GDP each year. As a result of this discrepancy between the large damages of floods, droughts, and storms, and the relatively small cost of action, the report considered climate change to be, I quote, the greatest market failure the world has ever seen. The alarming message had an explosive impact on policymakers and on the academic community, especially economists. A vibrant debate on how we should value damages that occur far in the future followed. Many people think that economics is about maximizing money. As a matter of fact, we maximize well-being, happiness, if you like. So we call in our jargon a kilogram of happiness a util, but that doesn't change the reasoning. So the Stern report took the ethical stance that well-being of each generation should be considered equivalently. For example, if we can avoid 10 kilograms of unhappiness in 100 years by investing or foregoing 9 kilograms of satisfaction today, we should do so. This ethical stance on climate change argued that to evaluate a transfer between two persons, it matters how unequal their consumption is, it matters how unequal their environmental quality is, but it does not matter when you're born. This ethical stance on climate change, on valuing the future, the discounting debate, as it was called, was vividly opposed by the more classical economists who advocated their descriptive approach. They said, if we observe in financial markets that people are impatient, that people give priority over the short term compared to the long term, who are we, economists, to impose our ethical view on society? Or they would say, if we can invest €2 today and obtain €100 in 100 years, we should not be willing to invest more than €2 today to avoid €100 of climate damage in the next century. Let's admit that valuing the future is difficult. So after the Stern Review, dozens, or rather hundreds of scientific papers, including in top economic journals, have been published, several of which by Professor Stern. But most importantly, it was Lord Stern who ignited the whole debate. Imagine that in 2050, the world is at zero emissions. We are at the end of the fossil fuel era. And imagine that some Hollywood producer would like to make a feel-good movie on how humanity managed to get to this magnificent result. So I would then advise him to start with a Stern Review and the ensuing debate on the ethics of welfare economics. There are, of course, many economists working on climate, but let me mention 3 of Professor Stern's distinguishing qualities. First, he has an optimistic view on the possibilities in the future, focusing on the potential of green innovation combined with good policy. Why did the price of photovoltaic and wind energy decrease so fast that today it is cheaper than coal in some regions of the world? Or why do certain countries see billions of investment in green technology and others don't? Or how can a government with a given budget maximize the effect on reductions of emissions? Second, Lord Stern has a discourse on climate change that keeps the developing countries on board. So growth is important, but we need a sustainable model. Growth and improving decent livelihoods of millions of people is a condition sine qua non for the Chinese, the Indian, the Mexican government to enact ambitious climate change. If you want developing countries to do costly cuts in emissions, propose them access to cheap technology. If you want cities with fewer cars, do smart city design in the new megacities that are currently being built in the global south. And third, Professor Stern emphasizes, more than many other economists, the connections between different economic problems. When one enters the building of the London School of Economics, there is a poster of Nick Stern, and it states, "The two defining challenges of this century are overcoming poverty and managing climate change. We have to do both. If we fail on one, we will fail on the other." And this is profoundly true, but I'm not convinced that all the climate negotiators have understood this correctly. To do justice to Lord Stern's very diversified career, I also need to talk about his abundant accomplishments in many other domains. He is professor at the London School of Economics since 1987. He was chief economist at the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, became then chief economist and senior vice president of the World Bank between 2000 and 2003, and then joined as second permanent secretary at the Finance Ministry of the United Kingdom under Gordon Brown. And since 2008, he's director of the Grantham Institute, one of the largest research institutes on the economics of climate change. Last but not least, Lord Stern has a prominent role in the international climate negotiations, including the Paris Agreement, as you can see in the latest documentary of Al Gore. For all these achievements, and following the unanimous decision of the Academic Council, I would like to propose to our rector to welcome Lord Nicholas Stern in our university community and award him the diploma and signatories of a honorary doctorate. Thank you.